with Local Future, and I'm here with several people who are associated with the Global Brain Institute, I believe. So we'll start with introductions. If we want to start with Mixel.
Hi, I did my PhD at the Global Brain Institute. I'm coming from an engineering background, artificial intelligence, but more focused on platform intelligence and global brain. So that's me.
And Francis?
I'm Francis Heylighen. I'm a professor at the Free University of Brussels, where I'm the director of the Global Brain Institute. So I have done a lot of research on intelligence at the collective level.
Great. And Don?
I worked for the space shuttle NASA from 78 to 95. I got interested in the global brain about the year 2000, and I haven't really participated in much of this group sessions or whatever. I've just been trying to promote it on my own. I've kind of leaned toward the edge of not trying to prove it so much as just propagate the idea.
All right, thank you so much. And my name is Aaron Wissner. I am a community educator, I guess you could say, and a retired public school teacher of 25 plus years. Let's go to our first question, which is for anybody out there who's never even heard of this concept. What is a global brain, or what is the global brain? And whoever likes to jump in on that, go ahead.
Well, the global brain is what we call the nervous system of the global superorganism. The global superorganism is the idea that all the people and their technological extensions together form like one kind of planetary organism that covers the whole globe. And then the part of that organism that does the information processing, the thinking, the reasoning, that we call the global brain. In practice, that means all the people connected via the internet and the processes through which they intelligently come to new knowledge and new insight.
So is that suggesting that the global civilization, the global economy, the world economy is sort of an organism of sorts?
Yes, because all the different parts are mutually dependent on each other. We cannot survive without resources being available all across the globe. So the system is very mutually dependent. No country can really afford to insulate itself from the rest of the world.
Mixel, what's your perspective?
It's the same. The thing I would like to add to it is that it's at the moment it's a system of interaction, of connection. I wouldn't yet consider it a conscious living entity, on an autonomous entity. So it's more like the global brain is emerging than the global brain as an autonomous entity at a higher level already exists. And that links the only thing we do know that the world as one entity is doing is regulating its temperature, but it's not like regulating its mind yet. I mean, if we look at the internet today, we see more of collective madness than collective consciousness. So we are moving, we are learning how to become self-organized in it, but it's a process.
Is the global brain, is that similar to the idea of kind of like a global civilization, and the civilization is all sort of one, like a superorganism, like an ant mound would be a superorganism? So it's like one level up from cells and then organisms, and then you have like a superorganism?
Yes, but I wouldn't call it global civilization. A global civilization is more something that you think in the long term, like over decades and centuries, while the global brain is something that works very fast. That's just precisely what the internet has created. That is that we now can come globally to new insights within the space of hours or days. And as people say, sometimes that leads to lots of craziness. But I think generally speaking, for example, the reaction to the global pandemic has been in all countries largely the same, which is lockdown, a special, all kind of precautions for virus transmission. So that means that knowledge that has spread from China, where it was first discovered, to the whole world, that has spread incredibly fast. If you would look at something like an epidemic happening in the Middle Ages, it would have taken maybe a decade before people in Turkey would know that there was some epidemic that had started in England, and they might still not have an idea of what to do about it.
So it sounds like the global brain it has a lot to do with the internet, and I imagine it has to do with, does it have to do with social media as well then?
Well, unfortunately, in my view, the social media are one of the more ineffective forms of internet communication. I mean, I started using the internet in the good old days when there was just the World Wide Web and email and no social media. And there was kind of more of a selection, in the sense that the people that were there were not just chatting mindlessly, they were trying to put some interesting information on that. And the best example that I still see is Wikipedia. That is the way the internet, according to me, should work. Social media are to some degree an aberration.
I would like to add, it used to be a good example, because now also Wikipedia has become a platform for politics, and that's kind of, it's not purely information anymore. Some hot topics, if you can dig a little bit deeper, you can see that there are some things happening behind the scenes. So it's not purely self-organizing anymore. But if you go in, I fully agree with Francis that if you look at the research on social media in the late 90s, they were exploring many directions, and the social media platforms we see today are just one very specific kind of coordination happening. And it's not in the benefit of amplifying your awareness. It's more in the benefit of damping your awareness, because suggestions are made for you. You're not triggered to think about suggestions. So it's all about how the platforms allows the coordination between people, what is getting put in the center and what is put at sides. And at this moment, what is put in the center is trying to get you to behave in a certain way. So it's not to the benefit of the consciousness of a person. It's more into other benefits, right?
Yeah, the problem with the social media is that they are commercial. They are there basically to make money for the networks, and they get money by grabbing your attention by any means whatsoever. And grabbing your attention means that you can't pay attention to something else. And as Mixel says, indeed, it's contrary to becoming more conscious of what's going on in the world. It's kind of becoming more conscious of the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, as long as it's very stimulating, and then you forget it immediately because you're again bombarded by something else.
And if you want to see like the emergence of the global brain, I think like Francis just mentioned the pandemic at the moment. So you do see how it quickly follows up across the globe, how to deal with this pandemic by looking at where it originates. But do notice that the pandemic is the consequence of the fact that people travel this fast, so that the virus could have spread this fast. And the information is actually catching up. It's not that we were aware before the virus would be spreading, which would be a more advanced version of the global brain, where we could actually be proactive instead of reactive. At the moment we are reactive, and we are actually want to go proactive. And it's something in the Global Brain Institute in 2012 we were actually looking at. We had a training mission to the province Hebei, to China, to work on food security. So we were actually working on problems like that. But that happened because so 2012 12 is the year after the Arabic Spring. And the Arabic Spring gave a lot of attention to the research on the global brain. But then, of course, business was back to usual. So now we can actually look back at the current crisis and again, explain better what this global brain is emerging to.
So if there is this idea of a global brain, is it already here? Or is it like a child, where a child is a baby, an infant, and they learn language and they grow up and eventually they become kind of sentient or conscious? I mean, is it a continuum like that, or is it just kind of switching something on and the global brain is turned on?
It's indeed more as you describe. It's like a child becoming more and more sentient. In the beginning, the ideas are still quite incoherent, and then gradually the child learns how to behave and how to think more coherently. And I think that is what's happening with the global brain. But how long that process will take, it's difficult to say, but at least a couple of decades, I would say, before it really functions in the most efficient way.
I like the metaphor you used for the documentary, where you showed Embryo, where you see the global brain at this moment as an embryonic phase, where all connections are made yet, but not by learning the self-organization gets better. And crises like today are terrible, but at the same time also a very big moment of learning. Everyone is learning now. On themselves, but so.
So what is the hope for the global brain? Why would someone want something like this to arise?
Because the global brain, by definition, is much smarter than the people. It's like every one of us can contribute some nugget of insight, but altogether we know much more. We, in theory, can understand much more than separately. So that is why you would like the global brain to develop more. For example, again, my example of Wikipedia, because it's such a simple example, there's more knowledge in Wikipedia than there was ever in any place on Earth available, in any book or any library even. That could only have happened via the internet.
I would also like to add that this is macroevolution. It's not that we want it to happen. It's that it's most likely to happen because it's how evolution works. It will take the road of less resistance, and this seems one of the ways it can flow. So if you look at other computer simulations on how the globe is self-organizing, you will see that it's pure self-organizing dynamics at play. So I would actually say that it's not something we want, it's something that's happening to us. And if we understand it better, we can actually go with the flow instead of bumping against the walls all the time.
So this sounds like something where we're talking about a super intelligent entity, kind of, where the super intelligence is able to organize us. Is that kind of the idea?
I would say that has always happened to us. Means that's how we are cultivated. We live in societies, right? So we speak common language. That didn't came from nature, it came from nurture, right? So as a culture, we've always have been in this situation. So
yeah, what Mixel means is that our culture, our language, our science, our morals, all of those have developed collectively. There was not one scientist or one great thinker who formulated all these laws and rules and morals and ethics. It's a collective construction. It's just that before it took centuries for such knowledge to appear, while now via the internet, It can in principle happen in days.
So what role does an individual like myself or one of you or anyone play, if at all, in this global brain?
Well, every individual can contribute, and at the simplest level of contribution, that's something you do see in social media. Just by making certain choices on the things that are offered to you, you express certain preferences. And these preferences are kind of a way of estimating what people like. That's, let's say, the simplest form of contribution. But the more interesting form of contribution is, for example, you have your own website or your own YouTube channel where you post interesting ideas, which other people maybe build on, and the one builds further on the idea of the other. And in the end, you come to a completely new insight that no one individually would have been able to do, but that through the collaboration via the internet has emerged.
Yeah, it's like one individual cannot take on a whole country, right? But one individual can inspire a whole country. So if you look at history, we have individuals who have influenced a whole society. So the evolution of a whole society, and that's happening today as well. I mean, there are people on the internet not only talking about things, but also programming things that will have an impact.
What role, if any, does either artificial intelligence in like a very specific case, like solving chess or solving Go, or in like the general sense in being actually able to have any sort of conversation you want, like a general AI? What role do either one of those have to play, or what role do you see them playing in a global brain?
Well, if you look at AIs today, I mean, like with the speak recognition, they're learning from us, right? So we're all already entwined there. So it's a little bit silly to talk about separation between what the machine learning is capable of doing and what the people are capable of acting on. The things are already entwined. But the thing is that the way I like to describe it is you can take intelligence, you can put it into an algorithm, and then you can create complex automation. So that's what we classically call machine learning. If we think about more in lines of global brains, we take the intelligence, we put it into a platform, and we create complex coordination. So in both cases, it's about a way to deal with complexity. When on the one hand, you try to use it to automate. On the other hand, you try to use it to coordinate. So is that an answer to your question? Because
well, I'd love to hear Francis's reflection as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is, as you say, there is the narrow view of AI, which is using AI to solve particular problems, to do particular things like, let's say, translation or voice recognition or recognizing faces. These applications, well, they will continue to develop and they will hopefully support our decision making. There can, of course, always be abuse of that, but in that respect, AI is like a tool. It's like a tool that automates certain parts of the global brain functioning. So certain information comes from a certain source. It needs to be processed into something else. Let's say information in one language needs to be translated into another language. And because of this translation, the whole system functions more efficiently. So that's a function which AI is playing at the moment and in which it will continue to play and play ever better. There is also this dream of general AI, which is the idea of artificial general intelligence, which is that you would create an artificial intelligence that would be autonomous like a person, meaning that it would have all the capabilities of a person or even more. Now, I'm personally much more skeptical about that because, as Mixel said, all the AIs up to now they're not autonomous because they learn basically from people. Learning things is extremely difficult. You need to have a lot of information, experience. And that experience, up to now, all the information that is available on the internet has been put there by people. Of course, there will now also be information like photos or sensor readings. Machine learning may extract some things of that, but to have out of that an artificial intelligence that would be completely autonomous in making its own decisions, first, I don't see what would be the point of that. And second, I think that would be so difficult to build that it won't happen anytime soon. And the global brain is a little bit kind of a contrast with this idea of an autonomous artificial intelligence. It says human intelligence, artificial intelligence, they complement each other, and all together they form this huge collaborative or collective intelligence that we call the global brain. And none of them can claim to have some kind of a pure autonomous ability to solve all the problems in there.
I'm wondering to what extent the AI that already exists, like in Google, in Facebook, in the various personal digital assistants that we're knowledgeable, that we know of, are they assisting in making it more of a global brain?
Well, what would you? Well, it's double. The question is like, yes, but are they doing it for humans? And that's for me a big difference, because the way I'm seeing that they are doing it now is not for humans, but it's for organizations. And it's a difference that makes a difference. It is at the same time a gray zone, because I'm working with a lot of big organizations, and they are trying to learn how to put the people central. So they simply don't know how to do that. They're learning how to do that. But today the big machine learning are helping the global brain to emerge, but I guess it's not going to be a human global brain then. And there I see a big danger that we could become slaves to the tools we are making. Just like you in your society, you can become slave to the society you created, right? So it's not different for me. The thing that is happening with the global brain and the thing we're doing now on much larger scale, it's not different than the thing that we've been doing the past 10,000 years in our societies. So what kind of super structure do you want to build?
Just checking my questions again. So for a global brain, is there going to be like a boss, like a person, like
if we design it that way,
a decider of some sort? Is there someone that says, yes, this is what should be done? And is there going to be someone that has a veto where it comes up and it's like, no, you forgot something really important, like we don't do certain things because of certain values?
That's why I like to make the comparison with our societies, because it all depends if we design it that way. Today, you see that there are, again, societies with extreme authoritarian people at power who kind of have they demand everything and they say everything, but it's because the structure, the system at play is designed that way. And that's where I agree with Francis, that if we go back to the research on social media, it was more diverse. There were many ways, many flavors, many different things to do. But today, there's only one kind of social media, and it has only one purpose. It's to benefit the corporates behind it. So, and that's the enslavement we are doing at the moment. But it all depends on the system we are building. And therefore, everyone has an influence, because we are all building the system together.
Well, to answer Aaron's question, I would say that the whole idea of the global brain is precisely that no one is in control, that it is not centralized, that it is distributed, that it is decentralized. What Mixel is referring to is that there is some degree of centralization, in the sense that you have certain corporations that are particularly powerful and that have aims that are not the aims of humanity as a whole. The aims are simply to make as much money as possible, and they will do it by whatever means are available in this case, and that means basically via publicity. So that is a danger, and in the original versions of the social media that Mixel was referring to, I'm speaking about the 1990s, when the internet and the World Wide Web was coming on, then basically the web was not commercial. So the people who were doing that were basically volunteers, they were researchers, they were students, they were hobbyists, they were creating all these kind of systems just in order to make, to create this kind of collaborative intelligence, not to have one particular group make a lot of money. But still, I don't think that any group or any person can control the internet. So I'm not afraid that the global brain will be dominated by a single central person or group. But yeah, it should ideally be more democratic and more collective.
Yeah, and there I disagree. And the way I disagree is because if I look at the history of innovation, if you go back to like the invention of the gunpowder, the sextet, the printing letter, it all happened in China at the moment that the empire was interested in technology. So there it was a very clear hierarchy. Now in Europe, there was a whole different system where there was way more competition between the different countries. And therefore the innovation was more open to flow from one power to the other power. But if you look at cultures where there's clearly centralized control designed into the system, then it would become possible for one person to rule the world, basically. So that's why I want to say is that it really depends on how it's designed. Now, I on the other hand, agree with Francis that it's, from an evolutionary point of view, more probable that the more distributed will take over, because designing a system like that, it's hard. But I do see in history examples that contradict it.
This makes me think that perhaps there's two competing philosophies at the moment. One is kind of the corporate, which is really the richest are the ones that have the power to determine the algorithms on who sees what, versus the more collective, which is going on at the same time, like through Wikipedia and other sources. Do you see that as a struggle as well?
Yeah, there is that struggle, and yeah, until not so long ago, I thought that the decentralized democratic structure would be winning. At the moment, it looks more as if the corporate structure is winning. But yeah, things change. I mean, there's only one constant you can say in technological innovation, especially on the internet, is things change, and they change very quickly. So how will it be in 5 or 10 years from now? It's difficult to say.
Well, I'm trying to do participation, applied research on this. And I noticed that the corporates, so in the specific ecosystem I was examining, I noticed that the corporates were winning, and it was in 2010. So I started digging into the corporates and try to understand why were the corporates capable of taking over a healthy ecosystem. And when I started examining in more detail, I noticed that the problem was they were just too big. So they were very big, and they came to a small pond, and they just took off all the resources out that pond. But it's because they were so big. But going into the bigger corporates, you see that there's a awareness that they are willing and wanting to transform. They are not very good at it. If you dig a little bit in detail, you see that there are many mistakes, but it's based because there are other powers at play. It's not about the knowledge that always prevails. There are some other powers there, but there's a willingness to transform. So there's a lot about organizations that want to transform into more healthy, human-centered structures. So the funny thing is that, so if you go, it seems that corporates are winning, but inside the corporates, there's something other emerging that may bring us back to the more distributed version. So again, it's a gray zone. There's no clear which of the two forces are winning here.
What would be the
There's
Go
a
ahead,
general
Francis.
argument that is that if you're dealing with a very complex situation, you need to have a complex system. That means a system that is centralized is not really complex because there is this one person at the top that needs to make all the important decisions, and that person can never have the intelligence and the means of a whole group of people working collaboratively. That's why Wikipedia could never have been created by one person, even if that person would have had thousands of people to give tasks to. Initially, they tried to make Wikipedia much more centralized, and then they gave up and they just let people write articles on their own without having a plan of who should write what. At a certain moment, it just becomes too complex. Also within a corporation or within a country, you can't control everything, and then it's better to give autonomy to the different elements in your organization.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned Wikipedia as an example here, because one of the trends that emerged in Wikipedia is called corporate pages. And the corporate pages are regulated by a corporate entity. They are not written anymore by a collaboration anymore. So the thing is that Wikipedia for me is one of these healthy ecosystems where corporates came into, and it changed, and it hasn't been the same ever since. And but the thing I do see is that although you could actually have a healthy centralized system, the question is, will the people that needs to make decisions make those decisions based on something that is entangled in the world? And there you see a big problem where a lot of decisions like lobby systems trying to actually disinform, and then you cannot make the right decisions anymore. So then this hierarchy structure doesn't work anymore. But if you create like a professional bureaucracy, and I see that Eastern countries have more tradition in that, to create professional bureaucracies that do work, then it can actually be a system that works. And I actually see reasons for this inside our brain as well, where our visual cortex of our brain is also organized in hierarchy. But there, the top part that this measuring is still measured based on the entanglement in the world. So so even if in your brain you see those hierarchies.
Yeah, but it's a hierarchy of abstraction. It's not a hierarchy of control. It's not that there is one decision made at the top level. It's everything is parallel, but it goes into a hierarchy of abstraction levels, and that's something that in the global brain will also be necessary.
And that's what I mean is, some of the big corporates are now hierarchies of control, and you see that there are some of them trying to learn how to shift from a hierarchy of control to a hierarchy of information. So there are some examples there that they are trying to do that shift. And then the two, it doesn't matter if you come from the left or the right, if you come from distributed to the global brain, or you come from hierarchy to the global brain, you're coming to the same domain of self-organization.
Well, this brings up several thoughts and several questions as well. One reflection is that one of the founders of Wikipedia actually started recognizing that it wasn't really headed in a collective democratic direction, and so he split off and he tried to make a different encyclopedia, and then he split off that one and tried to make yet a different encyclopedia. So I can see that there's a concern that the Wikipedia isn't, fully fair. So anybody going on there obviously has to be aware of, who might be benefiting from what's written on there. Another aspect of that is that the Wikipedia is edited. The editors, some of them are on there like all day long, and so there's these super users that are on there continuously, and they're continuously looking for stuff. Hopefully they have beneficial things in mind, but it's a small group of people that have time just to sit around, and they can get alerts on every single edit on every single important page, and they can look at that edit and they can be like, no, not that one, not that one. They can lock pages, they can change stuff. So from a certain extent, that's kind of like a, what's it called? A technocracy. So.
I wanted to come back to the first thing you said, like they see that this project is not working, they split off. We call that forking. So and you actually see that also a lot of online projects that fork. And I've noticed that the more cultural rich projects, they may actually branch and then spoon again. So instead of just forking and say like, I'm going to explore this and they're going to explore that, when the community is strong enough, they can spoon again and they come back and stronger together. And so that's why I start focusing on culture as digital culture, as the force behind the glue. And I think that in that sense, it's a field, and it's harder to actually trick the system then. What you said, like you just hire a bunch of people that will be coding all day. But if there's a strong culture that is going in a certain direction, you cannot fool the system, because it will flow in the other direction anyway, because there's a big momentum.
So kind of not necessarily in the same thread that we were working on, but what aims, if there is a global brain, if there were a global brain, what would be its aims, its goals, its purposes, its values? What would it want collectively? What would it be? What would its vision be for the future?
Well, I think actually we have a model of that in the Sustainable Development Goals, which is something that has been arrived at through a long process of consensus seeking between many different national and international actors. And I think it's a pretty good way of stating what should be the goals of a global brain. We want to develop, that means we want the whole of humanity to become better educated, richer, healthier, etc. And we want to do that obviously in a sustainable way. So sustainable development, I think, is a good summary of what should be the goal of the global brain. And if you want more details, then you can look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course are addressing the situation that it is at the moment. And what's likely to happen is that as technology develops and some of the older problems get solved, new problems will arise and new opportunities will arise, and the goals will also change. The goals in terms of what are we going to invest most of our energy in now. For example, now we're all invested in combating this pandemic. Probably a year ago, nobody was thinking to have that as this global goal. So goals will change depending on the circumstances, but I think the overall goal should be indeed sustainable development of the planet as a whole.
From a design perspective, I would see that as the most beneficial way out, the most humane way out. It's where we create a new social contract with nature also to be more sustainable. But if you ask me, like, to not only defend the humans in this perspective, but what is the end game? I think the end game, this is a cosmic game of getting to higher levels of energy, which also means higher levels of intelligence, which means super intelligence. And so the thing that Francis is describing now, for me, it links back to Gaia and Mother Earth and being a very humane kind of civil super intelligence. But think about it, for me, it's like the birth of gods. It's the emerging of super intelligence of gods. And there can be many gods, right? There can be Mother Earth, but there can also be Kronos, the one of pure chaos. And I think in the 70s, we almost were ready to wake him up. If we would have started a nuclear war, we would have gotten a very different activated world, because we would have triggered something loose in evolution that wasn't capable of triggering loose without the human intervention. So in that sense, humanity would have been like a switching point. So like the resource of this evolution and maybe not the mediator of the evolution. We would of course love to have it as Mother Earth, but I can see other versions. I can also see the one where there's a machine god. And if I see the way that today the internet is making people always be active, always be linking, try to think as little and click as much possible, I see that we are getting submerged to the god of the machines, because that's like the Matrix. We need to do all the information and the experience so that the machine can actually be aware on top of that. That would be another evolution that I can see. So, but I can see several way out, but all the way out, all the next levels are always about superintelligence. And it seems to me like a cosmic play. It's something it's pure evolution.
Would a global brain be able to solve global issues like poverty, starvation, war, inequality, climate change, biodiversity loss, those sorts of things?
Well, that's precisely what the Sustainable Development Goals are about. And as the intelligence of the global system increases, it should become better at solving these things. Of course, there are always problems that have some intrinsic snacks in that, and the global warming is probably the most tricky one, in the sense that everybody agrees that we should do something about it, but nobody wants to do the first thing by stopping to use fossil fuels. So it's one of the more tricky ones, because yeah, it's easy to say that others should do it, but to stop it yourself, it's more difficult. On the other hand, on all the other domains, I think we have been making and are making great progress. For example, people tend to think that war is a big problem nowadays, but compared to previous centuries and even previous decades, there's very little war at the moment in the world. We basically have the war in Syria, and we have a few places in Africa or in Afghanistan where there's still a war, but compared to even what it was 20 years ago, when we had Gulf wars and so on, the world is actually a pretty peaceful place, and statistics show that the number of people killed in wars have diminished quite spectacularly, at least over the past 100 years. So it's one of the examples. Other examples, poverty is diminishing. The number of poor people on the world as a percentage becomes ever smaller. The number of illiterate people becomes ever smaller. So most of these goals are being achieved in a pretty efficient way. Of course, you always want it to be faster, but if you look at a historical timescale, we are moving pretty fast towards these goals, with global warming at the moment as kind of the exception.
I would add to it that if we would be more conscious of what is happening, we could move faster. And okay, so global warming is a big problem, but food security is also a real big problem. And the crisis we have today is a clear consequence of this, that we don't yet have a grip on our food security yet. So the other thing I see in there is that there were enough warning signals, there were enough scientists mentioning this, but the information didn't get into the hierarchy to where the global decisions were made. And so there I see actually that more awareness of how a global brain could be more efficient in solving the needs we have today, and understanding that actually all problems are approachable if you start working with superintelligence, then you could actually make that more efficient. So for today, there's not yet enough the information in the world that from real measurements are not yet all the way going up to where decisions are made, because of other power structures, of course.
What would the role of current organizations be in the future if a global brain becomes more and more conscious, so to speak? I mean, what of the roles of religion and states and national governments and corporations and any large scale organization that exists?
Well, I want to, because you're talking about religions, I want to begin there because lately I'm looking at self-transformation from a religious point of view as a way to understand also how to get to superintelligence. And what I learned from investigating it is that if you see more recent views, so not the historical views, because I mean, most people, if they talk about religions, they look at, they mention people from more than a century ago. But if you look at like really recent spiritual leaders, like after the 70s, let's say, you see that things are coming more and more together. So there's also more and more awareness, also awareness of not being aware. So that's something you have in those settings, right? But they're getting closer and closer to, in my view, to a common understanding. And so what I see is that everything is dissolving into this new entity. So it's not like if they fall out of it, it's because they want to fall out of it and they didn't do self-transformation. And I'm talking self-transformation on the level of an individual. I'm talking self-transformation on the level of an organization. And I'm talking about self-transformation at the level of a religion. So all of them are in a need of self-transformation, and then they dissolve in the same direction.
Well, about organizations, nation states, and so on, I don't think these are going to disappear anytime soon, but I think that they will become less of the core decision makers. They will make all kind of decisions about, let's say, more local things, but I think the really big, important decisions will more and more be made at this global level, at this level of the global brain, and the others will just have to follow that. I mean, in the European Union, we have seen that process to some degree, that European countries individually have less and less power to, for example, to create standards or to have rules about food safety, because it's better to have the same standards and the same food safety measures across the whole European Union. So lots of these things, they will need to be decided in some way globally. And I know that especially in the US, that's a very painful point, because the US is kind of used to being the leader of the world and not to have to listen to anybody else. But I think also now with the pandemic, you see that the US is not that powerful compared to the others, and they just suffer just as much as anybody else. And if they need to develop a vaccine, they will probably need to do it together with all the others. And so it's not that there will be kind of a world government in the traditional way, a centralized system, but there will be a very complicated system of mutual agreements, of coordinations, that together will form this global brain, and the nation states will just be a minor part of that, and the corporations as well.
It's kind of fascinating, Francis, because you suddenly make me realize that one of the things I noticed in the digital ecosystem, so it's a digital startup ecosystem, right? And there was a policy at play, and the policy can explain why people are willing to actually give their power to the global brain. Because the policy they had in play was, it's better to harm your company, so your startup company, than it is to harm the ecosystem you are in. And the logic they had is, as entrepreneurs, they were very easy, capable of starting up a new company in that ecosystem. But if they would kill the ecosystem, then they would have no space to entrepreneurship in. So, and there was a common culture with all the entrepreneurs, and it's that specific policy. So I call it the community first policy. So they had a community contribution policy, which means that 10 to 20% of the time they could just work on project they want to. But next to that, they had this community first policy, and that allowed the whole thing to become like a dissipative system, a self-organizing structure at a higher level by a simple policy. Don't kill the ecosystem you're living in. And in the same kind of logic, you can actually understand why the global brain will, by pure evolution, gain more power, and why countries and everyone in power is going to want to give the power to the global brain, because it's going to be in their benefit. So there's a pure logical evolutionary reason behind it. It's by giving away that freedom, they will gain even more freedom.
Is a global brain, do you see any parallels anywhere else in history, in organisms, in nation states and religions? Are there any, is there anything that's like similar, like a metaphor?
Well, I mean, all of human history is a metaphor in this sense.
As far as just the history of civilization since the first agrarians?
Yeah. We have gained so much freedom and so much abilities. I mean, people are capable of flying. I mean, from a pure natural evolution, we wouldn't have been there, getting there. So we've given away some of our freedoms, like not being able to kill our neighbors, for gaining the freedom of flying, right? So I see there a strong parallel. And if you want to go deeper in evolution to other systems, of course, we look at ants, because those are like the only other animal who is domesticating the world around them. So they are farming and doing domesticating the, how do you call them, the
leafcutter ants?
Yeah, yeah. So they are milking this other cattles. I don't know what its name is.
Yeah, what are they called? Something fly.
They use them like cows, basically. So they have the equivalent of cows, and they have the equivalent of farms. So ants are already doing that, and so we in the research we're using that a lot as a source of making comparisons. But I at the moment also look at the different open source or digital projects, and try to understand how cultural difference can teach me something about the global brain.
Does this concept of, go ahead, Francis.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I will have to go. So maybe just one more question.
Okay, well, I think that probably could be a good place to finish anyway. So the last question, noogenesis, noology, noocracy, are those words to be associated with global brain?
I didn't understand. New what?
Noogenesis, the emergence and evolution of intelligence.
Noogenesis, yeah.
Noogenesis.
Yeah, okay.
No genesis, noology, no, those sorts of things. Is that the same idea?
Yeah. Actually, at the moment, I'm working on a project about the noosphere, which is, for me, another word for the global brain. The noosphere or the global brain, it is indeed the kind of a creation of mind at the global level. So that is, noogenesis is one way to describe the emergence of a global brain.
Mixel?
Well, I'm more of a practitioner than of knowing all the literature out there. So I don't know the term that well. So I just prefer my feet in the ground, and in the ground in this sense is a digital community. So.
Any final thought before we say goodbye for the viewers?
Stay healthy. No.
Francis?
Yeah, maybe one final thought, which is that there is always a kind of what is called the negativity bias in psychology. People always pay much more attention to everything that goes wrong and to all the bad news than to all the good news. And that's why I think that we, especially now with things like the pandemic, everybody's focused on all the thousands of people dying, but while forgetting that life expectancy for the whole world is still increasing, which means that on average, fewer people are dying now than there were 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 10,000 years ago. So these whole processes of the global brain being a kind of a benevolent intelligence that will solve our global problem, I imagine that lots of people think that it is kind of utopian nonsense because they hear nothing but bad news, but that's just because bad news travels better. It's not because the news is really bad. If you look at all the good things going well in the background, then maybe all those bad things, which of course are important and we should pay attention to them, but maybe those bad things don't appear that dominant anymore.
In that sense, I want to add that if everything around you is that bad, go a little bit deeper and go even to yet worse to even darker place. Because if you're fully in the dark, well, then there's a crack in everything. Then the light comes in, and it's at that moment that you can actually use your own brain to hack into the global brain.
Well, thank you so much, Mixel and Francis. And for everybody on YouTube or wherever you are watching this from, if you appreciate content like this, please hit like and subscribe and comment and sign up for notifications. And look up the Global Brain Institute. Can you give us a reference or maybe future reading or something to look into after this?
I can also give you a link to a documentary that's been made about the global brain. Oh.
Excellent.
Yeah, just search the term global brain and you will find all the information there is about our institute. There's a Wikipedia page on the global brain that kind of summarizes the whole idea, which has also links to our institute.
All right, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Okay,
Pleasure.
bye.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.